Tom Fuentes is a former assistant director of the FBI, and Andrew Cherkasky is a criminal defense attorney, a former JAG attorney, and a former federal prosecutor. So, Tom, I'm going to start with you because of all your background at the FBI. I want to just read a couple of quotes that the DOJ said about why they're pitching the magistrate does not unseal the affidavit. They said, quote, it would compromise future investigative steps and that it would, quote, likely chill future cooperation by witnesses whose assistance may be sought as this investigation progresses. That last part, this investigation progresses, caught my attention, and I may be way off base, but if they have everything back, how much progressing do we need on documents?
Well, Ashleigh, the way that sounds to me is like they intend to never stop investigating Trump. So therefore, we have to keep this sealed. We can't reveal all the ways that we knew what to look for at Mar-a-Lago because essentially we're never going to stop going after Trump. So therefore, the investigation is never going to end. And we need people in the future to realize that we'll protect them and they'll be safe and issues like that. And I think that many of the comments made by DOJ in the aftermath of this raid have not served their purposes well or have not indicated any desire for transparency on the part of the government.
So, Andrew, weigh in with the legal mind as well, because some folks say it means that there's bigger stuff afoot, that it's not just about documents. I mean, they didn't even, use underlying crimes that pertain to classified documents, right? Just the possession of certain kinds of documents. So I wonder if there's any possibility that that language, as the investigation progresses, means that they might be looking at some other kind of investigation, that they might have wanted those boxes, not just for the documents, but what the documents might do to help another case, perhaps the one in Washington, the one that's got a grand jury convened that's looking into January 6th.
Well, what we know from the warrant is that one of the things that they're looking into is obstruction of justice. And so at this stage, it just being in an investigative stage, I'm thinking to myself, if I'm prosecuting a case like this or if I'm investigating it, and I'm thinking this person who I'm investigating has some basis in kind of my thought of obstructing justice, by giving them the full affidavit, that may encourage or give them the opportunity to further obstruct justice. Now, we're just speculating at this point, but really what I know in doing this as much as I have is when an investigation is going on early, before there are charges, before the formal discovery process and the formal court process begins, the investigators have the advantage and they want to be able to have surprise and they want to be able to get people to cooperate with them. And so I think that what I'm seeing, big picture here, is that the FBI is not ready to hand this case over to the defense to allow them to start building their case and their defense and to start to undermine and attack the integrity of the investigation that they have going on.
So, Tom, help me understand a couple of things. The passport story got blown up big today. Donald Trump said they took my passports, and it turned out they were actually returned that night. But there's a kind of process when there's a search and seizure operation that involves a lot of stuff, especially stuff that could be privileged, whether it's executive privilege or attorney-client privilege. And there's taint teams, right? So help me understand what happened when those boxes came out and went to the field office. What happened?
Okay, well, first, during my nearly 30 years in the FBI, from street agent to senior executive, I was involved and oversaw and personally conducted hundreds of search warrants as an affiant and as an investigator and as a manager. And in those search warrants, you have to be very specific what you're looking for, where it's at, where you're going to find it. And that type of particular information is very important. And it sounds to me, in having reviewed this warrant, that it was really overly broad. So if there was an intent to find evidence of everything under the sun that they could pin on Trump, then that's only confirming that it was a fishing expedition and they didn't have specific information to go to a specific location in that compound to recover it. Secondly, Justice Department.
Although they did, but I will say, wait, there were two rooms that Brian Enton's source impeccably described as the room down the hallway off the pool that had the padlocks on it, about 6 by 10. And then the other room, the former bridal suite that was Donald Trump's office above the ballroom. So they did outline those two specific rooms. But I'm more interested in the taint teams, right? I'm more interested in this business about grabbing everything, going through it fast, and assessing what they are not allowed to have, attorney-client privilege or executive privilege, or the passports say, and what they are allowed to have. Like, is that still going on now?
Well, we don't know what they found when they brought those boxes back to their office, the FBI office. But one of the things is that the president has the power as president to declassify anything and everything he chooses. So Catherine Herridge, an outstanding journalist at CBS, yesterday showed copies of the orders that President Trump signed, one of them in particular in connection with the Crossfire Hurricane FBI investigation against Trump way back when. And he was declassifying documents. Secondly, he didn't pack those boxes more than likely. So if GSA or whoever came in, if he already issued the orders that everything in my office is declassified, which he had the power to do constitutionally, then they're not classified. Although the boxes that they were in could have still had markings of top secret or other classifications, or the documents themselves. But that doesn't mean they truly were still classified if he declassified them before leaving the White House. So we don't know that. We'll see later. As far as the passports, somebody on another channel this morning made an issue of what's he doing with more than one passport. Well, I had four when I was an FBI executive, so that's absurd. You have the blue tourist passport, a brown official government employee passport. I had a black diplomatic passport, and I had an Interpol passport as a member of the executive board of Interpol.
Oh, you didn't get the red one, huh? Okay. Well, hold on. Let me ask Andrew about this though, because you're right. The passport issues was like it got swept up. They said they returned it right away. So let's not go over the passports. The conspiracy theorists could say all they want about it, but Andrew, the fact that he does weirdly have a magic wand. Like, the Constitution does allow the president to declassify anything. Most presidents have been very, very careful and gone through a process. And, you know, there have been loads of people who need to know in the process. But if he doesn't want to do it, he doesn't have to. That could change now. But in the interim, the fact that the government came back and said, okay, you have stuff, we need it back. And he refused because he sent a letter signed by his lawyer saying we sent everything back, and they still wanted these very, very dangerous things that they say existed in the pool room back. He has this quote now saying, it's not mine, it's not theirs, it's mine. It's not theirs, it's mine. Is that incriminating in any way, Andrew?
I think it's the opposite of incriminating. I think that it shows that his mental state, or mens rea, in the eyes of the law, is that he honestly believed that they are his, not theirs. And in fact, I think the recent interviews that we've heard about from the former White House attorneys, where he said to them, "They're my documents," suggests that Donald Trump has all along believed them to be his documents. And so I don't think that the FBI or the DOJ, Merrick Garland, even at the tip top, has the right to simply say to a former president, these are national documents, even that they're of national security. I mean, Donald Trump was the president of the United States. It is an incredibly rare position. It is given incredible power by the Constitution. There cannot be ticky-tacky laws passed by Congress to interfere. I mean, that's the separation of powers at play there. It is the president and his discretion about what he does with those documents, and whether they are his or not really can ultimately come down to a question of whether he declassified them and what he did with them. So I think it is relatively compelling, in my view, at this stage, that the FBI and the DOJ is up against some constitutional hurdles to establish that Donald Trump could have even violated the law in declassifying these documents and holding on to them by claiming that they're his. And I think ultimately, I think that we have good evidence that he thought that.
I find this just so fascinating. I love this job, especially when there's something that can be seen completely differently from two different perspectives. But I have to wrap it there, but I want to have you back. Tom Fuentes, thank you.
Yeah,
it's
if I could make one more quick point.
Thank you.
Excuse me,
Yeah,
Ashleigh.
if you got 10 seconds, that's it.
Okay, Merrick Garland debated with himself whether to approve this warrant for more than a couple of weeks. So that what urgency was there? The magistrate signed this the Friday before the Monday that they were served. Where's the urgency there? If there was nuclear secrets that
I'll
were
play
going
the
to
devil's
destroy the
advocate
country, what
Sure,
was the
I'll play the
urgency?
devil's advocate there because it was going to be the most extraordinary thing they ever did, the most unprecedented thing, and so they had to make sure they, did it all right.
That sounds like an ego
on
trip.
their half. Well, or they could have been. We got to be really careful because we cannot do anything to this guy if we're not right. And so, anyway, guys, you got to come back. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching. Go to newsnationnow.com to find NewsNation on your television provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.